Hey everybody, today is Monday, April 3rd, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, editor Dan Lebental.
Jeremy said, look, well, you got to look at it. And I go, well, of course, for you, yeah. And it's like, damn, this is a good script. One of the best scripts I had read in decades.
Plus the secret star of the 2023 Oscars telecast, Ace Eddie Award-winning editor Taylor Mason.
Joe basically asks me if I wanted to go to the Oscars. And I said, of course. He's like, okay, let me up the ante. How would you like to be on stage at the Oscars?
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, greetings, you post-production aficionados, you editing enthusiasts. Got a fun show for you today. Kind of a different show, in fact. How so? Well, give me a minute and I'll tell you. Now, as you heard me say in the open, we're going to be talking about the new film Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves with editor Dan Lebental. Dan is making his record 4th appearance on The Rough Cut. I think it's 4. I know it's 4. I don't know if it's the record. But why would you care anyway? But it's 4 times. Dan's been on previously to talk about Spider-Man Far From Home, Elf, and Bad Boys for Life. And if you didn't know it already, Dan is a stalwart, I love that word, stalwart of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, having cut films like Iron Man's 1 and 2, and Ant-Man and the Wasp, among several others. Dan's always a lot of fun to talk to, and here's where it gets a little more interesting. Dan is currently working on the reboot to the Beverly Hills Cop franchise, a film called Beverly Hills Cop Axel Foley, and he's right in the thick of it, actually. Now, when I do these interviews, a lot of times the editors are between projects and have a little more room to breathe to do these things. But sometimes, like Dan, they're actually doing the interview from their cutting room in the spare time they have. Let me correct that. They have no spare time. Somehow they make time, which is what editors do. So Dan said, hey, let's do the interview on this date and time and we'll just see how it goes. Well, as it turns out, when we did record it, mega producer Jerry Bruckheimer was outside Dan's office waiting to review a cut with him. So the interview is a little on the short side and a tiny bit disjointed as Dan was getting notifications about when he would be called into action. And I left some of that stuff in so you could get a sense of what it's like for a big-time film editor to be in that kind of high-pressure environment. Because, when it's showtime, it's showtime. You will probably also notice a little change in Dan's audio halfway through this one. What can I say? It was a little hectic. But that's also one of the things I liked about it. And Dan has a lot of good stuff to share. Someone else who has lots of good stuff to share is editor Taylor Mason. She unexpectedly found herself on stage at the Oscars this year. How about that? And how does that happen unexpectedly? Well, we will find out. But before we do, I should make sure to give a quick tip of the cap to Extreme Music, who helped to bring you this podcast. Now, let's say you've got a big action-adventure fantasy film coming up, one that is just like Dungeons & Dragons. You're going to want the music to be epic and orchestral, not like you just hired some 2-bit lute player you found at a Renaissance fair. And that is where Extreme Music comes in. They are the masters of epically orchestral music. From since the days of yore, they have been providing film and TV makers like you the very best in production audio. All of it created by musical wizards like Hans Zimmer, Snoop Dogg, and Quincy Jones. Yes, I always say those 3. I just love the sound of them as a trio. But no matter which artist you choose, you can get their tracks in all kinds of shapes and sizes. You can even select which instruments you want. Get that lute out of there and just stick with the pan flute if you like. Not only can you tell Extreme Music what you're looking for, you can show them by uploading a track you like but don't own, and they'll find you ones just like it. It is nothing short of musical sorcery, I tell you. So the next time you want to bring legends to screens both big and small, team up with our friends and Rough Cut sponsor, Extreme Music. Okay then, back to Taylor Mason and the Oscars. Where do I begin on this one? I think it all starts with an email I received. And I am warning you now, this is going to take some explaining and it'll be a lot of me talking, so apologies in advance. You can stop listening if you like, but after you get through with me, there is great stuff with Taylor and Dan. Now, besides my after-hours role as strictly amateur podcaster, I do have what I consider to be a real job, and that is at Avid. You know Avid, the fine folks who brought you the Avid, or just Media Composer as we're fond of calling it. Avid also makes Pro Tools, which pretty much just goes by Pro Tools. And my job, this century anyway, is head of artist relations at Avid. What does that mean? Well, as I am prone to explaining, it means that if you're an artist, I try to relate to you. And that happens with varying degrees of success. And it is also a job that covers a lot of ground, which sort of explains the email I am about to share with you. Now, this email was from someone whose name I will withhold, someone involved with the Oscars, who needed help from Avid for the presentation of the Film Editing Award. It wasn't sent to me directly, but through a little creative forwarding, ended up in my inbox on Monday, February 27th. So that's almost 2 weeks before the Oscars. All right, so I'm going to read you this email. And this email has been edited for time and to fit your podcast screen. Okay, here goes. During the presentation of the Film Editing Award, the screens will feature on the left. Okay, by screens, they mean the screens that you see in the Oscars up on the stage. We start over. During the presentation of the Film Editing Award, the screens will feature on the left, quote, film strips from the movie A Midsummer Night's Dream with an old-time film editing machine. And no, this is not where they're referring to the Avid, you wise ass. Okay. To continue. On the right will feature a current times film editing setup with frames from the film Dune. Here's where Avid comes in. We would like the interface to look like it's being edited on Avid. Well, it was edited on Avid. The film will be Dune. He just said that. Yeah, the film will be Dune, which was edited on Avid. Okay, he redeemed himself there. I need to find a contact that I can connect with our clearance department so we can get permission to feature the Avid interface in this screen's look. So I interpreted that, this is me, Matt, talking again. I interpreted that correctly, I believe, to mean that they wanted some high-res screenshots of the Media Composer interface, which is nice, but I'm the artist relations guy. I'm busy relating to artists. So I did what any reasonable work-dodging person would do. I punted it over the fence to my dear friend Michael Krulik, Avid's man about town in LA. Now we fast forward to about 5 days before the Oscars, and I'm in the Avid LA office chatting with Mr. Krulik. At which point he informs me that the assignment has gone from getting screenshots of Media Composer for the Oscars to providing an actual Media Composer system to be on stage at the Oscars during the film editing presentation. And Michael, being the genius he is, has parlayed that into him being the one to be on site at the Oscars, both during the prep days and for the actual ceremony. Now, I like to think I'm a team player. I mean, I'm not, but I like to think it. But if I had any idea that email could have led to me going to the Oscars, that is exactly how it would have gone down. But too bad for me. I've made and will continue to make bigger mistakes, so water under the bridge. Now, at that point, the Oscars folks were planning to have an actor model type person sit at the Avid on stage and just pretend to edit. And I think there was a minute or two where Michael pondered offering himself up for that job as well, because who wouldn't? But as he so often does, he made the right call and suggested to the Oscars folks that if you're going to be showing Dune on the Avid, why not ask Dune editor Joe Walker to do the honors? Especially seeing as how they screwed him out of accepting his Best Film Editing Award for that movie on stage last year. Well, that sounded good to them, and Michael reached out to Joe. But Joe literally has his hands full right now working on the next Dune movie. So Joe did what every editor should do. He passed on the glory to his assistant on Dune, Taylor Mason. Now, I have more secondhand details about how the event went the rest of the way, but this is where I am delighted to bring in Ms. Mason herself to share the first-person perspective on this amazing opportunity. Hello, Taylor.
Hi.
Where are you?
I'm at work sitting in front of an Avid, taking a break, thanks to you.
Thank you for sitting in front of an Avid again.
Yes, every day.
Every day. I think you have a really cool story to share.
Yeah, I'm still trying to believe it really happened. I'm still kind of pinching myself.
Well, let's start at the beginning. I mean, sometimes you have a good week at work. Sometimes you have a great week at work. I think for you, you had an epic week at work. Let's start with Sunday, March 5th, because that actually was a pretty big day for you too. What was going on that day?
Yeah, Sunday, March 5th was when the ACE Eddies took place. And it was my second time attending, but my first time being nominated and winning.
It's only your second time going and you're a winner?
Yeah.
That's a pretty good track record.
Yeah. 1 for 1. So no pressure. But I mean, I think it helped that I had 3 amazing colleagues by my side. It was amazing just to share this with them because I think, we ended up kind of pinching each other. I know when we walked off stage, Robin just stopped us and was like, "We won an Eddie, y'all. We won an Eddie." And then we took a shot. So, there's no better way to kind of celebrate this very surreal experience than with some of my favorite people. Like I mentioned earlier, still pinching myself. And crazy that this is only the beginning of one very amazing week.
Absolutely. Already you're starting off the week on a huge high, and then it's back to work. And where is work right now?
Right now I'm working from home. Actually, it's kind of more of a home and location hybrid. We'll go in for mixes and maybe screenings, but for the most part, I'm just kind of in my bedroom working away in sweatpants. I don't know.
At some point, I have to imagine a very important phone call comes through. Tell me about how you first heard about this whole Oscars situation.
Well, out of nowhere, Joe basically asks me if I wanted to go to the Oscars. And I said, of course. He's like, okay. let me up the ante. How would you like to be on stage at the Oscars? And I'm thinking, what's the catch? I mean, how you're not nominated? What's going on? I don't get it. Um, and he's like, no, they're editing a segment this year, or they're adding an editing segment this year, and they're going to kind of highlight some of the Oscar winners past, and in the background there's going to be someone using an Avid. Would you like to be that someone? So immediately I was like, yes, absolutely. I had no idea what I'd actually be doing on stage, but I mean, just the idea that I would be in the vicinity of this show I've been watching year after year. Like, even if I was just, a runner grabbing coffee for people, I would have leaped at the chance. So, yeah, this was, again, just more in the same week, more surreal news and experience.
Okay, so Joe pitches this to you. What did you have to do to get ready for this?
It was fascinating because I didn't realize how much they rehearsed. I mean, it makes sense with this big of a show and so many moving parts, but I think I was fascinated. I mean, I've been on set, and set to me is just kind of like everyone is excited and full of angst, and this felt like that, but on steroids, and and in the best way. I mean, it was just, and that this was before I was even on stage in front of the Avid. So just to kind of see the goings on basically were and what they looked like, and the tech director doing their thing. I mean, I was like a deer in headlights, but in the best way.
What do you remember seeing? Give me some highlights from those days leading up.
I mean, really just people rushing from one place to another, a lot of costumes, a lot of dress rehearsals, makeup artists, like just characters that you saw, like that you'd see on basically Hollywood Boulevard, not knowing where their destination was, and and being so curious about the segments they would be a part of and you'd be seeing later. I tried to guess, what the opening number would be like just based on who I saw running around. Had no idea, wasn't even close. But yeah, I mean, it was exciting. I saw just little pieces of the whole show. I think one of my biggest, I don't know what you would call it, fan moments was when I saw the donkey from Inisherin.
Jenny the donkey, yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to take a picture so bad, but I had to play it cool. No, but it was as exciting as I anticipated, and well, even more so, I guess.
Was there wardrobe and makeup and all that kind of stuff?
There was. Yeah, I mean, so we were about to go to rehearsal on stage, and I basically sat at the Avid that Michael was kind enough to just set up. It felt like he was my assistant for the day, assistant editor, just kind of getting the room ready, making sure everything worked and looked right on camera. So, all I had to do was kind of sit down at the Avid and look at the timeline and figure out what I was going to cut while on stage. That took maybe 10 minutes. And the rest of the time we went to wardrobe and talked about what a modern day editor would wear. And I'm like, well,
sweatpants.
Exactly. I was like, I mean, I did just come from work, so I could just keep this on. But I was obviously on stage with another woman who was an actor, and she would be working the moviola. And so they wanted something that would kind of work with her costume, which makes sense. This is a production after all. So we went through a number of things, and I just thought it was funny to see what people thought editors would wear, which is it's not completely accurate, but it looked good on camera. So I guess that's all that matters. And so, yeah, I mean, it did feel like I was kind of putting on a performance, even though I would just be sitting in a chair. But, the makeup of it all, the costume of it all, I don't know, made the moment feel even more special.
It doesn't sound like you were nervous at all at any point. Were there any nerves?
Surprisingly not. I mean, I think I would have been kind of a nervous wreck if I had been doing anything else on stage. But even, in front of millions, the idea of sitting in front of people at an Avid was probably the most comfortable position I could be in. Like I said, I sit at an Avid every day. I'm sitting in front of an Avid right now. So I think it's just kind of muscle memory kicked in and threw the nerves out. And it didn't hurt that my back was to the audience. So I couldn't see like all the faces staring at me. I mean, it was kind of like rehearsal. I, for some reason, was not nervous. It's still weird because nervous in front of people every second of the day. So, I mean, I think, the fact that Zoe Saldana was standing next to me somehow calmed me down. She smelled good. It was like she was a calming presence. So maybe that was distracting me enough from, what was about to happen when the curtain rose. But yeah, I mean, it was just me staring at the timeline, which is something that I'm used to, and that kept me calm.
So now that you've had this experience, is your agent working on getting you more on-stage editing gigs at award ceremonies?
God, no, absolutely not. And I would run the other direction. I'm definitely a behind the camera kind of person. And so if I'm, again, not on the Avid, I don't need to be on stage. Unless, of course, I'm winning an Eddie,
Eddie, why stop there? You've been on stage at the Oscars once. Let's plan for another one.
Right. I surely hope it's not the last time I'm on that stage, but this is a great start.
So what kind of feedback from your family and friends have you gotten from this experience?
Oh, man. I mean, the best, kind of most fulfilling part of this was the fact that my mom didn't know. I didn't tell her on purpose so that I could surprise her. But what was funny is she was watching the show with friends, and when the segment came on, she pointed at the screen, and I think she even paused it or whatever, device she was playing it on. And I was like, hey, this is the system that my daughter uses. Her room is just full of these monitors. It looks like she's on a spaceship most of the time when she's at work, and like just trying to describe to her friends what it is that I work on. And maybe, 10 minutes later, I send her a photo and I circle myself and say, did you recognize anyone? And she flipped out and got super excited. I was like, I didn't even know that was you. Oh my God. I didn't even. And I told her it's probably because my hair was done and looked nice. She couldn't recognize me. It's just the back of my head. So, but, she was excited and showed her friends. And, I just think that made me smile and, made this great moment even better.
Well, I left one thing out on this amazing journey you've had this year. So we talked about being on stage at the Oscars. We talked about winning an Ace Eddie Award. You also started the year off with a film at Sundance.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. See, yeah, this year is wild. I went to Sundance for a film called Birth, Rebirth that I cut in 2022. It's a horror film based on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, kind of about motherhood and reanimating, a little girl. I didn't realize, like, the goal was to get to Sundance, but I think that's everyone's goal. And you're just kind of like, yeah, we'll submit, see what happens. But to have it actually accepted and then to go and to watch it on the big screen, and it's my first feature, again, pinching myself, I'm pretty convinced that, like, this is only happening because there's some parallel universe where, the complete opposite is happening. Like, Trump is elected for the ninth, term, and I'm probably getting sucker punched on my way to work. I feel like this is too good to be true sometimes.
You might want to consider screenwriting while you're at it.
Seriously. I went into Black Mirror territory, but let me dial it in a bit. I mean, it's just, this year is wild. This year and last year, wild. But I'm just trying to stay present and think about what it means to work on projects that mean the most to me, because I think that's when I do the best work, and that's when that work gets recognized. So I'm very proud of Birth, Rebirth, and glad that it's been as successful as it's been so far, and hopefully we'll see it on the big screen later on in the year.
Well, Taylor, you have had an amazing year so far. I can't think of anybody more deserving of such a year. And, promise me when you are on stage the next time at the Oscars, you'll give me another crack at an interview.
Absolutely. Ed will have me.
Count on it.
Thanks, Matt.
Well, now that you've heard that amazing story, how about another? With apologies to Jerry Bruckheimer, from Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, here's editor Dan Lebental.
I know. What I'm becoming a TV guy here.
Dan, as your sort of unofficial biographer, I take great pleasure in pointing out that this is not even the first movie you've done that was based on a game. You just did Mortal Kombat a few years ago.
Yeah, it's a new thing.
Yeah. Well, if I had interviewed you about that, I would have asked this same question, which is, at any point in your life, did you play Dungeons & Dragons?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why when this came about, I was like, oh, wow, this is full circle, because I attribute Dungeons and Dragons to me even being in this business, the, imagination and creativity, and it's the real stuff. And, many of the guys I worked with, like Favreau, were the same. And that was some of the stuff we had in common.
As you were working on this film, were you conscious about adhering to the people and creatures and places of the game? Because from what I've read, the film is very faithful to a lot of aspects of the game.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there was a tremendous amount, and it really didn't have to be by me. I was more like making sure story and flow and, rhythms were all good. But these writer directors were very meticulous, and the people that would come in from E1, which is part of Hasbro, and Wizards of the Coast, minutia was very important. There would be discussions about stuff that was like, well, that's important to the fans, so good. I'll just make sure that the story and the flow and action are interesting here.
You mentioned the directors. This is kind of your first time working with directors John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, as directors anyway. They did write Spider-Man Far From Home, which we talked about back in 2019.
Homecoming, actually. They did Spider-Man Homecoming.
They did Homecoming. All right, well, let's try and connect the Spider-Verse to Dungeons & Dragons. I'm going to go on the assumption that it was your association with Spider-Man in one of its forms that led to you getting this gig, but I'll let you sort of fill in the blanks on how it all happened.
Strangely, the big champion in making this happen, which was very unlikely because I was already meant to do other things, but the pandemic was like a giant, reshuffle of the cards here that ended up with my ability. But Jeremy Latcham, the producer of the movie, and I go back to the movie Iron Man, and he was the champion, and they were, of course they were enthusiastic, but they were like, well, but can we get him? Can we get me? Just because I had all these other things, and I was meant to do the last Spider-Man, and then stuff, it just all kind of went different. It had in Australia doing Mortal and all this other stuff. But, Jeremy said, look, well, you got to look at it. And I go, well, of course, for you. Yeah. And it's like, damn, this is a good script. And, you wouldn't go, oh, a Dungeons and Dragons script. That's something that's going to be great. You would go, well, let's see, they're going to try to do something. But I got the script and it was good. It was really good. One of the best scripts I had read in decades. And so it's like, I wish it could happen, but it can't happen. But then, a lot of things happened and God bless Jeremy and the guys. They sat there and they waited and they never even met with anybody else. At least that's what I'm told.
Well, let's run with that because I like that. And it sort of leads nicely into my next question, which is, and I know this can be a hard one sometimes for an editor to answer, but they waited for you. Clearly they wanted you. What was it about your track record, your background, your IMDb page, whatever, was the reason they really wanted you to work on this film?
Well, the tone of the film is the center of my bullseye of exactly what I do, which is between Jon Favreau and I, we helped create what everyone calls the Marvel aesthetic, which was our aesthetic before we went and did that. And so there's lots of stories that tell you that no one knew that if that was going to work, but that was our aesthetic. And then this movie fell very much into that, not in some of the ways that comic book or graphic novel does, but in the tone and the desire to have a movie with heart. And that, that goes back, doing Elf with John and all that kind of stuff. That's what our center is. So I'm the right guy because I have the experience of doing blockbusters. Yes, I have the experience of doing large VFX films and action and comedy and then heart. So that makes it. And Jeremy was like, I can't think of anyone who would be better. Of course, that's what he's telling me. I love Jeremy.
I can see why. So knowing that you were a fan of I'll call it the source material, the game itself, and you wanted to really adhere closely to that and imbue that heart that you bring to the project, did John and Jonathan have an outline or any specific themes they wanted to hit on?
John and Jonathan were, I would arguably say, about the most prepared directors I've ever worked for, who knew going in what they wanted, knew how it should sound, knew how it played in their head. and then wanted that to absolutely be our launching. And so it made it like, I mean, they had so much thought in. So did that make it easier? Well, we still have a very long post to get this right. But I think the big things that they were trying to accomplish worked. And so in an odd kind of way, I had to do less redirects on the story than I have in the last 15 years because these guys were on it. Now, that doesn't mean everything's easy, but it means that, man, you're starting at a high percentile. So you're not fighting to get to the 80, you're fighting to get to the 90, the 95, you know? That's a great, rare place for at least the kind of work that I do.
Can you give me your definition for that term you just used, redirect? When you have to do a redirect, what does that mean?
There's parts of stories that don't work, parts of characters that don't work, character arcs that go nowhere. And then a lot of times I'll have to rework, sometimes addition through subtraction by pulling things out to emphasize other things, sometimes nudging and doing subtle character changes. This didn't have to do so much. It had a little bit. We had to strengthen stuff to set up our ending. We have to straighten certain aspects of the family and what the hero wanted on this one. They were there. It's not like, and that's actually largely the case, is that writers will tend to put things, and a lot of times it's a shorthand that isn't enough for the audience. So part of an editor's task is to focus in on, this is the core of it. Let's emphasize this. Let's build around this. We'll add some more lines in ADR. Maybe we'll reshoot some things to strengthen this. And then let's take this stuff out because it's getting in the way of really where we're going. And that's a lot of what the kind of editing I have to do. And this was a case where we had some of that, but not the degree I've had in the last 15 years on, you know, so I give full credit to the guys. They're the excellent directors.
Well, so they're excellent directors. They're also the writers. And when you're working with directors who also wrote the material, what are the benefits of that?
They have something in their head and very specific about, they hear the performances, they know the story thing, and so they're looking for that. The actor might have their own take on the thing, and those things have to be reconciled. So the good of working with a writer, director is they know exactly what they're looking for. But sometimes the difficulty is that the actor may be slightly different. And then they're like, okay, well, what is the thing that lands me closest to what I was looking for? So, it took me a minute to understand what their sensibility was, how broad this movie should be, with the comedy and the performances of that comedy. They were in complete lockstep together. They understood for the most part. I mean, there would be lots of discussions between the two of them, but for the most part, they shared that, which is great because I've worked with other teams before that didn't necessarily agree, and they did, so they were great.
I know you like to really tighten up the collaboration between picture and sound. I think we talked about that going back a few years. Give me a little breakdown of your workflow this time out, and specifically to that thing you do with picture and sound to make it a little more seamless.
I'm going to be called out in a minute. Yeah, so we're doing the system I've been developing, which embeds sound right with editorial. And now the advance is that I have a guy who's actually the supervisor and also lead sound editor is working next door on Pro Tools and Media Composer, with Media Composer being the center of the hub. So, it's funny because that allows us to be in a constant state of mixed, meaning that before what would happen is that we would get ready for a preview or a screening. We would stop editing, give it to sound outside, and then they would do their thing. And as soon as that screening was over and we started making changes, that mix was done. That could not be used again. It was broken. You could try to use in what we call stems, but going to the actual clips of dialogue that the actors say, it wouldn't work if you changed anything. So by doing it the way we're doing it, with Media Composer being the center of the brain, it now allows us to be in a constant state of being mixed, meaning we can work up to the day before and, they'll just be doing final tweaks and getting last music back in, and so we can screen the next day.
So when we talked about Elf, you said the movie had a very cynical tone and you felt it should be more like Big. So it got me thinking about the tone of this film. Is it a funny adventure movie, or in your mind, is it a send-up of adventure movies? Because there really is a fine line in terms of how you introduce comedy into a film like this.
You know, it is an adventure story, but it's centered on human issues, the family, reuniting a person's family and the decisions you make that are destructive to your own life. And it is just it's so interesting and very Dungeons and Dragons to have this disparate group of semi-losers in a way, all sort of failed in one way or another at what their character is, to have to come together and pull off this mission for, what starts off as very selfish reasons and to find their heart and altruism. So, it made for a lot of, that was the good writing that I was presented with that made me go, oh, wow, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. They all have very strong character arcs. That's the kind of stuff I can really sign on to and try to get it, precise.
It really is a superhero movie in a kind of way.
It is, because Marvel, what's great about Marvel superheroes is they're all flawed characters. And that's all, what makes them so interesting. Some of the classic DC, you had very, the Supermans, the Batman, the stoic guys who they may have had inner demons, but they were strong, things. Marvel characters tended to be more damaged, which to me makes it a very interesting dynamic, how one works around your deficiencies and then starts to evolve and lose some of these deficiencies. And that's great.
So knowing how important character is to you and the arc, one of the things that's often counter to that is pacing. Like, you want to have some time to really develop these characters and understand who they are. But at the same time, it's an adventure movie, it's an action movie. You want to keep it moving.
It's always the tug of war. I mean, you'll show it to an audience and they'll tell you, God, I wish I knew more about this character and why they're doing what they're doing. And it's slow at the beginning when you generally do setup and you generally establish, when you meet these people, who they are and all that. And so you have to be very clever. On Dungeons, the writer-directors were very clever how they made the exposition as part of this sort of trial, this parole hearing. And it was very clever and very entertaining, but still, as first cut, it still was too long, and we had to tighten it to get what we needed out, but get through it quick enough and keep it entertaining. Because that's the thing, is there's almost a rhythmic pulse to the way humor works in these kind of movies and in superhero movies, where you keep doling it out. And if you get too far from it in the wrong part of the movie, it starts to feel like it meanders because you're not feeding the monkey, you have to dole out the sugar with the medicine always. So that is tricky. That's part of the art of editing these things, make that flow. And at first, when you first sit down, when you do your assembly, every scene gets its full day in court, like it's the most important scene in the movie. And then, once you get past that and you've built them to be these max and every beat is this, then you start to go, well, let's see if we don't need this. Let's shorten it. Let's leave in the middle. Let's start in the middle. Let's leave before, let's let him get that point out that's the biggest point and then move, because that's always powerful.
So having to balance these four primary characters, I'm reminded of a conversation I had recently with Eddie Hamilton talking about how he does color coding in his timeline. He does color coding to alternate scenes, so you have odd and even scenes, different colors, and also color coding of different characters' dialogues. Sort of at a glance, he can see how much screen time, more or less, a certain character is having.
Wow. Eddie, I'm going to steal that from you. Eddie, it's lost to you. It's no longer yours.
But do you have anything that you do like that, or are there ways that you try and manage those elements of the story or the arc of the story itself?
Well, when we talk about timeline porn, is what I like to call it. We do color coding to know what tracks, what's added lines, what's sound effects, what's music, and that's been developed by my longtime assistant Don King. She's got this system, and I try to adhere. But I've always used in the back here, you can see boards with cards and stuff, because when we talk about moving scenes, I like to just stand at the board and then I can think clearly what would it mean to move a scene from here to there, that kind of stuff. And it also, during the shoot, that board tells me where we are in the shoot, and as it starts to fill out, I start to get scared. Oh, shoot. Do I have a whole movie here? We all have our methods. I think Eddie's sounds great. I got to try that.
Yeah, give it a shot. Being an adventure movie, it has by nature a very linear structure. It's sort of like, we've got to go to this place to get this thing, to defeat this villain, to go to the next place. There's a very A to B to C to D kind of structure to it. I don't think there was a lot of intercutting. I mean, everybody really was all together. It was, we are with this core group of characters throughout this process.
Well, there had to be certain things, the hardest part is to maintain what is the overall goal. Are we forgetting that? Because we have side quests to do. But by the way, that's very Dungeons and Dragons. Anyone who's ever played knows that you have your overall, but now you're going to have to go down and do this for a little while and then get back on track. So I think when they wrote that, that was semi-purposeful. But that was part of the fun. And then part of the art is to not lose the overall. If the strong thing is for Ed to get his daughter back, then that maintains everything there. And as long as you think his motivations are clear for the moments and how overcoming them leads him back to his final big quest, then you're all right. You haven't lost the handle. I've certainly been in many positions where we lose the thread of what we're trying to actually get to here. Then they're like, oh, yeah, that was part of the audience, that was part of the story.
What kind of feedback did you get on the screenings? Did you find that they were able to follow along with some of the more idiosyncratic elements of the Dungeons and Dragons universe?
The fans loved it. We had some surprises, though, some pleasant ones, was that, females, especially over the early 20s, were loving the movie, which was really... No one would have thought that going in. I guess that the family and the morality part of it really struck a chord. But audiences definitely, all these movies, you don't know if your jokes are going to work, because after a while in the editing room, you've heard them 10,000 times. And it's like, can you imagine how stale? Everyone has people in their life that tell the same joke, probably me in my girl's life, but over and over again. Can you imagine listening to it in the editing room? So then we need an audience to, oh gosh, they do like that. That's great.
In Elf, you were working with forced perspective, where one character looks much bigger than another, and it was all done practical in camera. And here we have in the middle of this movie a nice bit of stunt casting, a cameo, where you have one character much smaller than another. So I thought, here goes Dan again with his elf tricks.
Yeah, give that to the guys. That scene is so important to the directors, writer-directors, John and Jonathan, because the underlying poignancy to her journey and her struggles, this cameo. But yes, it has forced perspective done both digitally, but also practically, meaning that there were oversized chairs and things like that to do it. But now you can sit a person on that chair and then still shrink them and do all this kind of stuff. But yeah, they had a giant chair with Marleman sitting on. And the other thing that ties to Elf and that was that the directors felt very strongly that shouldn't be a big comedy scene, that shouldn't be about evoking cheap laughs based on the character size. So they wanted it to really be a heartfelt thing. And in Elf, we had also had a scene like that. If anyone remembers the tickle fight, at the end of that, there was a whole lot more, but we decided it needed to be the I love you poignant moment in that movie. So sometimes you sacrifice ripe fruit for the bigger cause of character.
We should talk about the music a little bit. It's not like doing Bad Boys for Life where you get a lot of fun with needle drops. You're not going to have a lot of classic rock or top 40 hits. So what is the temp score for a Dungeons and Dragons movie like?
Boy, that was as hard of a journey as everything is. That there was something, looking for a tone that was specific to this movie. We couldn't find another movie that had it. So you couldn't just temp from something else. Like, we just couldn't find it. So Lorne Balfe, the composer, was involved very early, sending in early rounds that we would develop from. And meanwhile, searches everywhere to find the music that rode that. The movie is fun and funny and all that, but the tone is quite unique where it lands, and music is such a big part of that. And Lauren really dug in deep and got some really great stuff here. And it was so much fun. I as an aside thing, I get to go, and watch some of the recording go down. And he'd bring in some of the most amazing, like, Irish musicians, that come in, and this guy is the foremost, whatever that little drum is called, and they'd be doing this and thinking, it's like, wow, this is fascinating. And I have such appreciation for, the kind of stuff they do. I mean, selfishly, I just want my cuts to look good with the music put on them, but, great admiration for it.
Well, I don't think there's anything selfish about an editor wanting their cuts to look good. You mentioned your assistant, Dawn King, who's worked with you for quite a while now. One of my favorite Dawn King data points is she was the AI voice of Edith in the Spider-Man film that you did. Anything fun for her this time? Did she get to pop up in the film?
Well, while we're cutting it and we end up having to put additional lines, she would be like the Doric. So she had to get her inner Doric on here. Doric is the tiefling shapeshifter. And we had to put a few lines for her, and it was Dawn until the very end doing that. And and I of course joke with Dawn a lot about you are Edith, you can do this. You're the great.
Once you're Edith, you can do anything.
Yes.
Well, editors all have different requirements they ask of their assistants. You mentioned, she keeps you honest in terms of your timeline and the structure and all that stuff. Are you the type of editor that likes a lot of help with VFX or with sound? Are there certain things you just like, I would love it if my assistants could be really good at this?
Yeah, no, I rely on my team. Everyone, I rely on, and I have a great team, and they're with me again, the same team, and and they're versatile. Like, I have an assistant that can do great VFX, and he helps the VFX editor. So we spill things. They all can cut sound effects, because before the sound team gets on, we build an entire track from our extensive library that we keep on hand. And so everyone has to, and the music editor, everyone has to contribute. And then I'll do a little of everything. Like, if I feel like I need a key sound effect in a scene, then I will go ahead and do it. 1 second, I'm just finishing the interview. 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. 5 minutes. So yes, if I have something just to cut it, I needed sound effects, I'll load it in myself and cut it. But then I'll send it to my team. They'll fill it all out, and then the sound guy who's in the mixing, he's going to start with doing some of it himself, some of it with the assistant editors, and then later in the process starts to build his own team of sound effects editors. So we'll start replacing out our library stuff with new stuff. So it's always evolving.
Well, I know you're very busy, and that, Jerry Bruckheimer is waiting on you. Far be it for me to keep Mr. Bruckheimer waiting. But as we started off talking about all the different things that you've done, types of films that you've done, is there another type of project you haven't done yet but would like to?
Yeah, there definitely. I almost did a musical once. I want to do that. Would like to get back and do a thriller. Really, really. I mean, we have them in the superheroes and stuff like that, and elements of them, but would like to do that and a little straight drama, because I don't. No one wants to just repeat themselves. You want to move on and do stuff. But I've been insanely lucky. People would kill to get the opportunities that I have. Doesn't prevent me from being jealous of hell of my colleagues who get to do this or that. So that's how I feel.
Being a Dungeons & Dragons movie, there's a lot of fun magic in the film. I think my favorite thing is there's a stick called the hither-thither stick, which if you're whoever holds the stick, they can sort of, if they can see something in the distance, they can create this magical portal from one place to another. That would be the perfect thing for editors, for getting out of one scene and doing, like, you just can't figure out how to get out of a scene and get into another. What a great device that would be. So my question to you, Dan, last one is, if you could have any kind of magic trick in the editing room or magic power in the editing room, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. Well, actually, the funny thing, why doesn't Avid put an instant temp music button on here? And also the instant sound alike, so I can, because I sit here and record lines and it's my voice, and then I pitch it to the powers that be. So it'd be nice to have that, or the Scorsese button. So, want to make it look like that. But the magic trick is somehow pulling off these movies, and it's, and these audiences are sophisticated, so no fooling them. You got to get it done right.
You're a wizard, Dan. You're a wizard.
Thank you.
Dan absolutely is a wizard on that Avid, and I am thankful, short that it was, that he was able to share some of that editorial magic with us while he could. Hopefully Mr. Bruckheimer liked what he saw. And I am sure you will like what you see when you check out what's new with Avid Media Composer. A new release just came out last week, and there are some really cool new features. Things like live updates to externally linked media, as well as improvements to the recently enhanced interop tools between Media Composer and Pro Tools. Oh, Dan will like that. And you will too. So see for yourself what's new in Avid Media Composer. All you gotta do is click that link in the show notes, and off you'll go. And off I go. Show's over. I hope you liked it. I should have another good one for you next week. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.